Right, I think everybody's in, so we'll just get going. Sorry for starting a little late. I'm going to kick off with a thank you to you lot for sticking it out this long and being here for me. The graveyard shift wasn't the most appealing thing for me, so it's nice to have you all here. I also have to send a little apology from my colleague Daniel Fett, who decided that staying home in Germany to prepare for his wedding next week was wise, given some of the travel challenges that are around at the moment. I've also got another little thank you to Eve Mahler, who yesterday in her keynote reminded us all that Federation still exists and will do for some time. It does feel a little like OpenID Connect, normal sort of Federation approach is not the cool kid in the block anymore. But there's some of us out there still trying to enhance its capabilities, and that's largely what I'm going to be talking about today in my little corner of the OpenID Foundation. So, I'm a director of an independent consulting company based in Scotland, and I'm also co-chair of the eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group of the OpenID Foundation. I've been doing that for over 2 years now, and hopefully you'll enjoy the output of my and my co-workers in the working group's hard work. So I'm going to be telling you today quickly about the OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance draft and the Advanced Syntax for Claims draft, both of which are being developed inside our working group. So we're going to kick off with OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance first. It is based very solidly on the foundation of OpenID Connect Core, which is, as I'm sure most of you know, a claims passing protocol inside signed object. Things like Alice Mirror and date of birth, exciting stuff, right? And what we're adding is verification metadata, largely. There's a couple of things that will become apparent as we go forward. But things like, and this is by no means a complete list, who verified the identity of the end user, how it was done, when it was done, and the evidence that was used when establishing that it was in fact Alice. And there's quite a rich JSON structure that covers all sorts of aspects of that dimension being created and standardized. The business case for this is when we want to communicate explicit metadata about identity verification and validation. And we also are handling some of the aspects of data minimization in this spec, and the next one that I'm talking about adds to that as well. And ultimately, it's all about interoperability and reduced cost. You know, we want to be able to enable software vendors to deliver to customers off-the-shelf software that eases integration at the end of the day and is just going to work. So yeah. We're being explicit and we're standardizing it is really the main approach here. From a perspective of the end user use cases, things like opening an account, staff onboarding, accessing restricted services. There's been some quite interesting conversation in other communities, particularly OIX, about whether we're going to be able to exchange levels of assurance in a reusable fashion in a wider context, or whether we need to be specific about the processes and evidences that were used. So our structure allows for more or less of that to be included in the payload, essentially. Our hypothesis is that OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance is the only one in the space that covers the richness of identity assurance processes and verification and validation. We've got explicit reference to trust framework, which I like to think of for the old school team, similar to the X509 certificate policy, effectively. And as I said, we've got very explicit verification and validation elements in there. From an implementation at this point in time perspective, we've got 2 fully operational deployed services and a third one going into live pilot later this year. And there are some vendor solutions available in this space, you know, deploying and implementing the protocol. And we also have a beta conformance and certification suite up and running, which will enable people to prove to themselves and others that the implementation they've got is actually conformant with the protocol specification that we've produced here. This is a bit of a chewy JSON blob that I developed for discussions with mobile network operators in this context. But we can break it down quite quickly and easily. This is the link to the policy domain, trust framework, and assurance level. This is references to the transaction, so a timestamp and a transaction identifier so that we can go back if there's some sort of dispute or problem to resolve the problem in whatever method is necessary. That blob there is a representation that one of the evidence items used was a driving license and that it was verified remotely on a particular date and time. And this one is a link into the mobile network provider, giving us some additional information about the level of confidence around the mobile records and how long have they been held and things like that. And finally, we've got a blob down here with the digital identity claims that are verified by all of the metadata above. As far as status of the draft is concerned, we did an implementers draft in November last year that went through really well. There's the 2 production services I've already mentioned. It's being used in the GAIN proof of concept, which I'm sure you've heard about in various sessions. So this is the first a profile of this is what we're using as our first interface for the data plane of GAIN. There may well be more of those in the future. We've had our first interoperability testing event with 4 independent identity providers doing an implementation and testing against the beta conformance testing tool, which surfaced issues mainly with the implementations rather than with the conformance testing tool, which was rather awesome. And we're working quite aggressively towards delivering a final of this draft by the end of the year. There's a bunch of additional features that we still have to do, but we're going to deliver them through additional drafts and profiles. So the work of the working group is going to go forward. Things like pending verification and complex subject identifiers are something that we're collaborating with the shared signals and events working group on. We've got an extension called OpenID Authority, which I don't think I've got time to tell you all about today, but I would love to talk at length on that one with people if they're interested. It's looking at on behalf of use cases. There's potential for profiling specific assurance standards on top of the OpenID for identity assurance specification. And we have the advanced syntax for claims, another draft we're working on. And through the magic of forward planning, that's the next section of this presentation. So this is the advanced syntax for claims. It has a number of features. Really what we're trying to do is allow for much finer grained control over data delivery. And the main drivers for that are for privacy purposes, but also potentially in some contexts, priority and potentially more costly claims may be presented by a provider. The relying party, however, if it doesn't have everything it needs to fulfill its use case, might not wish to pay for claims if it can't actually do what it needs to do. We've also got, because of the richness of and the depth of the JSON structures under identity assurance, we've got a bit more complexity to deal with in that regard. So the deeper structure needs a little bit more complex handling, essentially, and I think we'll see in a minute how that works. So this is a draft under the OpenID Foundation EKYC and IDA working group again. We've got 2 independent features. One is selective abort and omit, which is really starting to allow information from the RP to drive whether claims are returned or not. We do have a couple of issues outstanding with this one around execution order of the rules and some recursive problems. So there's going to be a little bit of change around that feature going forward, but it's something that we're tackling. And we also have a second feature called transformed claims, which is basically functional now, we think. We have a first proof of concept implementation, and a shout out to anybody from Authlete here, because it was them that contributed that proof of concept implementation to us. These 2 are most powerful when combined, so we can transform claims and then make decisions about whether they're returned to the RP or not. And there's no particular dependency on OpenID Connect for identity assurance. This could be applied to a plain old OpenID Connect server as well, and the power of it used there. So the selective abort and omit feature, it allows for if a claim is unavailable or if a claim is different from a specified value. And the actions that we can take in those cases are to abort the whole request, omit a specific claim, omit a set of claims, or omit the JSON object provided as part of OpenID for IDA. So there's a little bit of consideration there for the IDA spec, the creeping in. This is an example an example request using the claims request parameter. And it shows a few cases. So the phone number claim there, if unavailable, the whole request would be aborted. If the custom paid claim was unavailable, it would omit the set of claims tagged with omit set. So the place of birth would be omitted from further down in the object there. And then the richer one here, the trust framework value, if the value of the trust framework is different from Deutsche AML, then the whole request is aborted. So you can see we're starting to get quite rich conditions appearing there. And it allows the relying party to inform the OpenID provider of its needs in a richer way. Transformed claims is kind of fun. The main use cases are to return a subclaim. So the address object in OpenID Connect is a two-layer thing. So we can, using the subclaim approach, return just the country from within the address object. We also were largely inspired in this part of the draft by age verification use cases. And we didn't want to produce 200 or so different claims, one for above age, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and one each for below. So there's some quite useful capabilities there. And then finally, we want to be able to combine those two as well. So in this example, we've got address.zip code is equal to 90210. This one's a quick run through of how the age verification use case works. We start with the birth date, which is quite an important thing in our digital lives. Maybe you don't want to give it out to everybody. So what we'd do to minimize it is we apply a couple of functions. First of all, years ago, giving us a first level transformed claim of type number 22. And then we apply a second function greater than or equal to 18. It's only allowed static arguments for mitigating all sorts of complexity and risk issues, giving us a second level transformed claim that is of type Boolean, value true. That can then be fed straight back into normal OpenID Connect, or indeed the selective abort and omit feature that we were talking about earlier, and handled through an ID token or indeed a user info response. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's a bunch of self-contained predefined functions that we've put together that cover quite a lot of the use cases. There is every possibility we haven't captured everything, even with the catch-all regular expression capability at the bottom there. So it's perfectly possible to add additional functions for your own implementations. And we've added some simplifying capabilities through largely OpenID provider metadata for a provider to just say, I'm not going to implement all of this. I've got some particular use cases I want to allow for. So we can restrict the specific functions that can be applied when doing transformed claims. We can provide predefined transformed claims at the OP side. So a clearly useful one is above 18. That's the expression of how we would see that in the OP metadata. And finally, OpenID providers can state in the OP metadata that they are only going to support the predefined transformed claims that exist in their OP metadata. UX of consent or authorization was something that we wrestled with and debated for a little while. So the simple case is with the predefined transformed claims, an OP can write something that describes what the sequence of functions does. However, when a relying party is sending in a sequence of transformed claims, it's a little hard to take a sequence of functions and describe it to humans, an arbitrary sequence of functions. So the kind of safe fallback position that we're proposing is to say there's going to be a transformed version of the base claim returned to the RP. And hopefully we can make a suitably understandable presentation to the end user in that case. The takeaways really are OpenID Connect for identity assurance adds standardized assurance identity metadata. We think it's basically ready for implementations. There are no breaking changes left on my to-do list. I really hope somebody doesn't bring up a new one. There's a conformance tool available. It's a beta, but we're continuing to work on that. It has been tested by real implementations, and we're planning for final by the end of 2022. And the advanced syntax for claims side of it, it's a fairly new draft. It hasn't had an implementer's draft yet. That is the next step for us. But it really is about providing additional features around data minimization into OpenID Connect family. I don't know if these slides are going to get publicized. I've got a number of more richer examples. Given the time, we could either do questions or I could drop into the examples I have in the later slides. So where do we want to go from here? Examples? Cool. So thank you, and you might want to snap that for my LinkedIn just for ease, I'll leave that up for 20 seconds or so. So here's an age verification example where we're putting the definition of the transformed claim into the claims request parameter. The base claim is birth date. We've got two functions, as we saw in the PowerPoint version of this. The first function's years ago, the second is greater than or equal to 18. And then in order to get that to appear in the ID token, we've got the suffix of colon to indicate a transformed claim, and then the claim name as defined above in the transformed claims section. And then the response in the ID token, I've truncated it, or left out the kind of the normal ID token stuff. Just comes back as a colon above 18 true. Okay, is that one fairly simple? Makes sense to everybody? Okay. Oh yeah, I did a build on this slide. Forgot about that. This one's basically the same use case, but with OP metadata giving us a predefined transformed claim. This time we've got the prefix of a double colon to indicate a predefined transformed claim, but basically it works exactly the same. And then we've got the richer example here around partial matching. So in that function, or that transformed claim defined, the first one around company email is using a regex to match on the email suffix. Then we've got a nationality USA one, which is matching against any member of the array nationalities, so long as it contains USA somewhere in there. And then down in the ID token section, I actually don't, did I? No, I didn't do a build on that. We've got the company email being returned, and we're using the selective abort and omit feature there to say that if it's not true, then we abort the request. I think the rest might be fairly self-evident. Any more on the questions? I think that's my last example as well. Yeah, it is. So, hiya.
What happens? Is there a special message that gets sent back if there's an abort in the request?
It's just a normal OpenID Connect. I can't remember exactly which error response it is, but it'll just come back as a, yeah.
About age verification, what about I want to prevent any RP to get the birth date, but only the transformed claim? Is that feasible?
Yeah, I think.
Can you not publish the birth date, but only the request, the predefined?
Yeah, I think that would be a policy implemented just by the OpenID provider. Wouldn't be something.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so Bertrand was asking, What if we want to always prevent birth date being asked for explicitly and returned to the RP? And I think that would just be a policy applied by the OpenID provider inside their own control. It's not about the communication back and forth between RP and IDP.
Is there some reference code available? You guys have mocked that up at the same time?
So there's a commercial implementation with a YouTube video from the OAuth Security Workshop in November last year that you could have a look at.
Is the code open? Is it open source?
I can't remember. Joseph, do you know? Is Joseph there somewhere?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Is Taka's work open source? There's a question about a reference implementation here.
No, the reference implementation isn't open source, but he has a medium, I believe, where he went through a lot of the details.
Yeah. The other thing that might be useful for you is having a look at the tests that are run in the conformance testing suite. That's all open source, right, Joseph?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the interesting features was the transaction identifier.
Oh, yeah.
Does the specification provide guidance in terms of uniqueness of transaction identifiers in this kind of distributed environment, or do you kind of leave that up to the partners?
I think we've left that up to implementers, actually, yeah.
Which is fine.
Thank you.
That's
That's okay.
deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, okay. Any more? Come and help us do advanced syntax for claims and use OpenID for IDA for cases where it fits. That would be awesome.